Oh man, these guys keep messing with me. They take all the dumb things that I say and use it as like the intro of the podcast.
That's the whole point, man. That's the whole point.
Just a joke to you guys. Just a joke. It's the laughing stock of the company. You in so long, man. I feel like I used to see you around the Gnomon campus. I think the last time I saw you was at our mutual friend Louis Tucci's barbecue.
Yes. Well, yeah. I'm back. Gnomon pulled me back in.
Yeah.
So I'm teaching the digital sculpting class, and I have a few familiar faces in that class, and it's going to be a lot of fun. This is the first time I've taught that class, so. I taught Intro to ZBrush, like we were saying before. I taught that for about 7 or 8 years at Gnomon. And I've taught Intro to Maya, and I took about a year off when I was working over at Bad Robot, and now I'm kind of got more of a regular schedule. So I'm teaching on Sundays, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And the challenge of the class, the way I'm approaching it, because so Jared Krzyzewski taught that class for a long time before.
The intro class.
And he switched over. Well, he taught digital creature sculpting, and so now he's teaching intro. We kind of swapped. So this sort of the take that I'm doing it as kind of an experiment. So when I come into the class, the first 30 minutes I do ZBrush yoga, which is very California. But the idea is, and it's basically a variation on Lunch Crunch. But what I try and do is since they're all advanced students and they've taken ZBrush before, I spend the first 30 minutes of the class where everybody just takes, the Dynamesh project, Dynamesh 64, 128, one of those, and I just let them sculpt. And what I try and do is I try to tell them to not try. So it's a very Yoda type thing. You know, it's about doing, it's not about trying. I try and tell them, or I do tell them, not to try and make something, but rather than do that, just let the things flow. So this would be analogous to, if you're a musician practicing your scales, or even more just working on some good licks, So the idea is that, and I do this every morning on my own, and it's a really good practice because it allows you to explore the brushes without having necessarily a goal in the mind. And it takes about 10 minutes to kind of get into it where your brain starts to relax and you start to just, see where it takes you. This is probably going to annoy a lot of analog artists, but I do think that ZBrush does have a feel. People always complain that digital art doesn't have a feel to it. It's not like charcoal or clay, but I disagree with that. It's just a matter of, it's more of a psychological feel. So when you're sitting there and you're sculpting in ZBrush and you take something like the spiral brush and you just start messing with the settings a little bit, maybe throw a different alpha on there and just start shifting stuff around, and then do Dynamesh every once in a while to kind of get rid of the wrinkles. It allows you to kind of explore what the tools do. And I think this is really important because when you are in a studio working on a project, and especially when you're on a tight deadline, you need to be able to pull out these tricks out of your trick bag at a moment's notice. And being able to kind of build up this repertoire of tricks that you like to do is really helpful for that. So,
it's interesting. I can speak to that. That's a really good way of putting it too. And I since Dynamesh was introduced, I mean, you were in the days when ZBrush was just Z-spheres or people were retopoing.
Projection Master is when I started.
Projection Master. Oh yeah, that was just the topic of discussion recently, actually.
Yeah.
But it's just, since Dynamesh was introduced, it is a more natural way of sculpting, and it made it very difficult for me to instruct new people because it's like you do want to teach people Z-spheres, you do want to teach them retopo, but as far as like the art form of sculpting, Dynamesh is more in tune with that. But then you have to, it used to be like base mesh, subdivide, sculpt, right? But now it's like Dynamesh start, retopo, project, then finish sculpting, or whatever your workflow is, if you're going in for production's sake. What's
really cool about it, I think I totally agree with you, it totally changed ZBrush because it made ZBrush truly a nonlinear sculpting workflow. Now it's a circle. So students always want to know, when do I use Dynamesh? When do I use Z-Remesher? It's like, whenever you need to.
Yeah, that's the thing that people need to realize is that it's remove the technical part of the way that you think and think more artistically. Like that's the goal behind it. So as teachers, it's tough because we're teaching people to go into production. There are these pipelines, but also you do need to consider the creative part of your mind.
Yeah.
So I like the way that you describe that is there is a feel to it. And like, I think depending on the way that you train, you know, or the way that you think, I'm very abstract. When I'm sculpting, I'm in this sort of like subconscious state where I feel the interaction, you know, and I think it's just a projection in your mind. But if you're really in tune with what you're doing, you get that sort of sensory input, I think.
Yeah, and the great thing about sort of doing this 30-minute warm-up, ZBrush yoga, whatever, lunch crunch, whatever you want to call it, is that it gets your mind in that kind of nice flat state where you start to lose your self-consciousness and your attachment to your ego and all that kind of stuff, so that then when you start what you need to actually do, your brain is ready to attack it. You know, when you're working in a studio environment, there's a lot of stuff that you can't learn in school, right? And studios are very interesting, dynamic places. There's a lot of ego stuff going on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of you can psych yourself out. You know, if you're given like a big project and you're not so sure that you can do it, you know, you can start to psych yourself out and get really nervous and self-conscious about it. So you need to kind of build up that confidence with ZBrush. But
pretty accurate.
Whatever you're sculpting, you know, you want to basically be able to not worry about what the other guy's doing or how good you think you are or how bad you think you are. You know, it's your psychology as an artist is always interesting because you have the devil and the angel on your shoulder. You know, one is telling you that you're awesome and you're the greatest in the world and you're a genius. The other one's telling you that you constantly suck. Yeah. And everything you're doing while you're working is just trying to shut those voices out and focus on what you're doing and accomplishing the task. So doing a little bit of ZBrush yoga, as I'm trademark calling it, is really good.
It's unique. It's not, I mean, Lunch Crunch is a very widely popular brand, I guess, almost that I think it's up for dispute, but Danny Williams is supposedly the godfather of the Lunch Crunch sculpting.
That's who I credited.
That's the latest information I have on that is Danny Williams. So shout out to Danny Williams for starting such a cool thing. But I like that philosophy. I think that's wise as an instructor, especially because I read an article in Wired magazine years ago, and it's something that stuck with me. It was the concept of feedback loops, and in sort of applying yourself in an area, especially if you're a beginner, put yourself in a position to just work and do something that you get the feedback or the positive feedback, the sort of win, if you will. You complete something, you do it to the way that you wanted to, you get appreciation for it, you complete that goal, and that builds confidence and gives you energy to the next one. Yeah. And, you know, as 3D artists, we continue to do these things, and the roadblocks occur when you get uninspired, and some of that can come from social interaction, if people don't think your stuff is good, or
they just ignore it.
Yeah, or they ignore it, which is kind of like the same thing. It's like you show them your work, and like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. You know, and as artists, we kind of, something that we were just talking about outside is I think we have to take into consideration how much art is being shared now. So we kind of are developing this, you know, overload. So people don't see things as they used to, but it doesn't mean that the quality's not there. You know,
well, we need the freedom to suck. That's another thing I tell my students is like it's okay to suck because that's when you're doing your exploring. You know what I mean? It's a very natural thing. You know, nature learns from making mistakes. So, you know, I think we've gotten this idea that we have to be artistic geniuses, and if we're not, then we're not worthwhile. And I think that's a really I heard a great definition of genius a long time ago, where it just said a genius is the not having the fear of failure. So basically plunging into failure sometimes because that's where you kind of find new stuff. If you're just focusing on making, you know, the most beautiful lady model all the time, you'll get good at that, but you're going to come into a point where it's just going to stop because you're not progressing further anymore. So I think having the freedom to suck and being okay with it is very important. It's a difficult thing to struggle with, obviously, but I think we all have to stop trying to convince ourselves that we need to be Picassos or whatever. There's something I think about a lot that, you know, along this vein, which is the whole, the 10,000 hours idea?
Yeah, the mastering.
Now, I think it's a cool idea. I actually had my training in school in music, so I used to practice a guitar 6 to 7 hours a day. So I'm a big fan of practice, and I think it's important. But I do think that we have to recognize the fact that people's brains are wired differently, and there is such a thing as natural talent. I think the problem with the 10,000 hours ideology is it's almost got to the point where people are convinced that now we're all blank slates, and all we have to do is put in 10,000 hours, and we'll all be amazing.
Yeah.
And this goes back to what you're saying with feedback loops. Nature doesn't operate in dichotomies. It's not a nature versus nurture thing. That doesn't exist in the natural world. And nature is a big mess, and we are products of nature. Our brains are made up of cells, and cells are controlled by DNA and RNA and those kinds of interactions. Genetics does play a big role in it, but it also doesn't mean that we're necessarily trapped, right? It's not like the future is not completely written. So it's a combination of practice and also who we are. And I think the goal, to get sort of Joseph Campbell on the whole thing, follow your bliss and all that kind of stuff. The goal of being an artist is to find out what artist you're supposed to be or what your voice actually is.
Right.
There is a strong push, if you go on ArtStation or ZBrush Central, there is a strong push. A lot of people get kind of peer pressure. Everybody starts to do fan art, and they start to find an artist that they really love, and they try and do exactly that.
Right.
And it's kind of like the equivalent if you go into Guitar Center, you see all those guys practicing the same Black Sabbath lick, and it seems like they've been there for 20 years.
Smoke on the water.
Yeah, or Smoke on the Water.
Same intros.
Nirvana or whatever, And I think that, and this is kind of what I experienced when I was studying music. I did everything that I was supposed to do. I went to a very good music school, and I studied classical music because I thought that was the best way to become a rock star. Turns out that's not true. But, I found myself in a practice room practicing 6 to 7 hours a day, Bach and scales and all that kind of stuff. And when I got out, and I tried to become a musician, I failed miserably because I realized the reality of being a musician has nothing to do with any of that stuff, And so here I was trying to do everything exactly the way that I'm supposed to do it. And at no point in that period did I stop and say, well, what is actually the music that I should be playing?
Right.
And it's the same thing with ZBrush or any kind of visual art. What is the art that I should be? What is the art that's true to who I am? For me, it turned out to be bugs. I don't know why.
Yeah, which we've got plenty to talk about in that category.
Yeah. So I started to, and I did the same kind of thing. I was like really getting trapped into doing, okay, so I should be doing characters, or I should be doing creatures, I should be doing robots because I love sci-fi, just like everybody else, But I was not getting inspired. I just felt like I was constantly imitating. I was getting into that same trap. I'm taking a lot of figure drawing classes. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's very important.
Sure.
But you get to the point where it's like, okay, well, all I have to do is become the best figure drawing artist in the world. And then, then I can start working on my ZBrush skills.
Yeah.
And you realize that takes several lifetimes to achieve.
It does. Well, in the whole, like going back to the 10,000 hours, it comes from, is that the War of Art? I forget the...
It's, Malcolm Gladwell.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
Which, like you said, it's very well put. You can't put that as a blanket statement. And I think a lot of it has to do with the people, that kind of sort of philosophy comes from a person who naturally figured that out through the process of what you were just describing. Is I think you're naturally inept to whatever your experiences were as a kid, or what you formed into this person that just has this natural desire to learn a ton of stuff without really considering what the end goal is. And to me personally, because I'm very like-minded like that, and sometimes it's a struggle, to have to figure out, like, am I applying myself in the right way? But ultimately, I feel like the more you can absorb and learn and just pick up things through those processes, the better of an artist or whatever it is that you're going to do, the better you'll be at that. But setting the goal is like, I just want to be the best and mimic the best artwork.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of newcomers do that, but I think eventually, naturally, you figure out that that's not how to actually be the best.
And how are you going to measure the best anyway?
Yeah, and
is the best to somebody that can specialize and do the best human character, or is the best somebody that can do everything?
Yeah.
For a while, I wanted to be a studio musician, and I thought, okay, well, I just had to master jazz, country, blues, and all this other kind of stuff. And it wasn't until later on that somebody explained to me, it was like, studio musicians are hired because of who they are, what they sound like.
Right.
Go listen to Let's Dance by David Bowie. That's Stevie Ray Vaughan, right?
Yeah.
And he was hired because that's the particular sound that David Bowie wanted.
Yeah.
And that does also happen in production in CG. So last year, I had a really interesting 2016. It started awesome, and then it kind of went. I think that's true for a lot of people. Could say that too.
It's a frequency, you know. We got highs and lows.
You know, it was all right. It was interesting. So I got a call from a friend of mine, a former student, Nathaniel Morgan, really great, or a CG artist, an incredibly brilliant guy, who wanted to know. You know, they had an opening at Bad Robot. They wanted somebody to work on this creature for 10 Cloverfield Lane. And since I was known for doing a lot of insecty stuff and that kind of stuff, so he called me up. It just so happened that it was like the perfect timing. You know, the stars aligned. I just kind of finished up a gig. I was kind of figure out what to do next. So I got to go and work there at Bad Robot. And it was a perfect example of what I'm talking about. They had this, if you've seen the movie, this is going to be spoiler alerts, but at the end of the movie, there's a lot of really cool creatures in it.
Yeah.
And what they had at that point, they were trying to figure out how they were going to do the ending. And they had decided, they meaning the director and also J.J. Abrams, they had decided that they wanted to have a close-up shot of the spaceship. So they had the spaceship all modeled out, and they knew that there was a creature in the spaceship. So it was one of these symbiotic things. But at the time, they had basically, it looked like Pac-Man with fangs. I mean, it was like a sphere, a mouth, and a couple of things. So
this is like the look dev version of it, or the animatic version of it.
Yeah, I think originally they had this spaceship was going to be the distance. You were just going to see that there was something in there, and then they decided it's not a dramatic enough ending, so they decided to do a close up.
Well, they did a pretty good job overall, I think.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So Brandon Fayette, who a lot of people know, is a really great CG artist and a joy to work with. He kind of basically said, "Here's the situation. You got 2 weeks to model this. Can you do it?" And I said, "Yes." No hesitation whatsoever. Why? Because I've spent hours and hours and hours
You're
doing...
comfortable in your abilities.
And I know I can do a good monster sculpt because I've been studying insects literally with, at my home studio. I have a microscope right next to my Cintiq. And so I often use both of them at the same time to model. So I'd done enough of that I felt really confident that I could do it.
Yeah.
But plus I wanted that kind of challenge. So I got to spend, basically a week and a half, 10 hours a day just sculpting the crap out of that thing. And they kind of gave me a lot of creative freedom. There was obviously guidance.
Sure.
And then there was a technical aspect that this thing has to be rigged and it has to be dynamic. And they wanted to have, 8K textures on each piece of it. So I had to lay out the UVs and the topology and all that kind of stuff. But at least the first part was all just go to town. And I thought that was really cool. To me, that's the way movies used to be made. This is one of the things that I really like about J.J. Abrams' approach. He's always that kid in Super 8 that is got a camera and he's going to make the cool movie, right?
That's such a fantastic. It amazes. I'm happy that there are people that are able to maintain that in such a big business, because it's tough. Like you can get transformed by just constant barraging of people that are concerned about money. And when it comes to the art form, you do need to have creative freedom. Of course, restrictions and pressure needs to be set for deadlines. But
there's a certain one of the problems that the industry is suffering right now is people don't trust their artists enough. So everything's becoming sort of a committee kind of decision, and that's one of the great things about my brief tenure at Bad Robot, which was so much fun, was it really did feel like, this is the kid down the street that's always making a movie. It just so happens that he's got a lot of money to make it, which is cool. So I got to sculpt on that, work on it, and then I think this is probably one of the highlights of my career was we were just hanging out working on Cintiq, kind of finishing it up, and all of a sudden this kind of crowd of people, and in these studios it's an open environment, everybody can see what's going on, and this crowd of people kind of gathered around me, and I'm kind of like, what's going on? And they were like, well, JJ wants to see your model. And I was like, okay. But luckily I was like at a point where I'm like, okay, I think I've worked out most of the things, and I knew that Brandon was happy with it, and the visual effects supervisor, so it was kind of cool. So he's he basically took a look at it on the Cintiq, and it was in ZBrush, and he starts, moving it around, and we reminded him how to rotate the model and all that kind of stuff. But JJ is very CG savvy, so he picks this stuff up really quickly.
Yeah. So I've heard this before.
Yeah.
As far as he's very passionate about that. And he's actually interested in.
Oh, definitely.
Did you actually get him to use ZBrush?
Well, he was just looking around at it, and then he looked up and it's like, oh, it's 180 million polygons. I'm like, damn straight.
You know it, dude.
So, and he said, that's
HD
great.
subdivisions.
Yeah. I had a lot of different subtools, and it was still behaving really nicely even at that poly count. But he just basically gave the thumbs up and said, that's perfect. And I'm like,
awesome.
Woohoo! And so now it's like, now I've got enough street cred. I can use that story for the next,
approval.
Yeah, exactly. and then, then of course we had to retopologize it, rig it, and set it up for dynamics and all that kind of stuff. Also do the rendering, look dev and all that kind of thing. I was mostly responsible for the sculpting. It had been sort of pre-designed, but I wasn't given any real concept art. One of the things that I did is the teeth, which originally looked like the vampire fangs, I kind of used as they actually around the corner next to the bathrooms in the studio, they had the practical model from the first Cloverfield, one of those little subway creatures.
Yeah.
So I was able to look at that and kind of take some cues from that.
Did they have that in the film? Were there any like cross characters or creatures like subtly?
I don't think it's ever going to be settled. I think the idea behind Cloverfield, at least the way I understand it, is Cloverfield is kind of like the Twilight Zone.
Okay.
It is a series of stories. I don't know if they're going to make a third one. I've heard rumors or whatever, but it is a series of stories that basically center around unpleasant interactions with alien visitors.
What a fantastic idea.
Yeah, I think they're going to keep it kind of open like that. Which
I love it.
Cool.
Whatever the general public felt about the movie, I thought it was wonderful. It's a movie that speaks to people like us that. Like we were talking about earlier, you get kind of jaded in the same sort of formats.
Yeah,
it's like these sort of sequential ordering of movies and backstories, and like everybody wants the origin story now. But sometimes it's kind of just cool to be like, to just throw something in the mix and change it up. And you didn't I honestly did not expect. As I got about halfway through the movie, I was thinking, maybe this isn't connected to Cloverfield at all, and they are just kind of playing around with people and making you assume that it's going to be connected. So I thought it was more of a thriller, and then boom, the ending comes up, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, I saw the movie in reverse because I hadn't seen any of the first part of the movie, and I'd only seen the end and the end in the ZBrush interface.
Yeah, right.
So I didn't know about how they were going to kill it.
Hopefully you change your custom UI colors a little bit every once in a while, because it gets dark. If you're in like you're just sculpting days and days and days in, you're just surrounded by these dark palettes and the coloring. I have to change it up sometimes.
Oh, I make theme color palettes.
Yeah,
I have one from April 20th that I bring out once a year. It's kind of got some Rasta colors on there.
Rasta Monster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's another series that'll be coming out after Sexy Baby, Rasta Monster.
Rasta Monster. That's great.
That movie, 10 Cloverfield Lane, was cool because it started out as such a Hitchcock thing. It's a perfect metaphor for what we're going through right now as a culture globally, because nobody knows what's going on.
That's a good point.
And we're all basically that poor young woman who's at the mercy of a crazy guy.
Right.
I'm a crazy guy. I'm not going to say who that is. That's, but they're out there. There's a lot of them.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And they're all seem to be in charge of countries at the moment. And so then we have all these other threats. We have threats of the future in terms of climate change. We have the threats of nuclear proliferation, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that movie really, I think, captured the feeling of 2016, 2017 in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
And I like to go, and of course, John Goodman, is one of my favorite actors.
He was fantastic in that movie.
Yeah, and he's so amazing. So I was really excited to get to work on that movie. But like I said, I saw the ending before I saw the rest of it, so it was really neat. And
have you seen King Kong?
Cool stuff. I haven't seen the new one yet.
Well, we'll have to talk about that, John, because John Goodman had a role, and I don't want to spoil it for you. Are you going to see it?
Yes.
Okay, I won't say anything. We'll talk about it after. I'll send you a message on Facebook. Well, I was so excited to have you on the podcast because, number one, I mean, we haven't really, for those that don't know you, if people that are in the CG community, of course, know your name, but you have such a wide range of skills and abilities. You've been talking about studying music, and not to mention you're a science nerd, you're a teacher, you work in visual effects for production, you've worked in all these movies. So it's almost like I had a hard time figuring out where to begin with all this. But when I first started at Pixelogic, I just picked up your Intro to ZBrush 4, I believe it was ZBrush 4 book, and I just assumed that, okay, Eric's, he's a book guy. He's got all these books. And then I come to find out you're also teaching at Gnomon, you're teaching creature design, you're sculpting, you're modeling, you do animation. How did you, as far as, it seems like you've kind of you're the kind of person that tries out all of these things.
Yeah.
So what kind of led you to the point where you seem to be focusing on modeling, sculpting? That's what you prefer.
Yeah. I am a generalist in that I can do, dynamics and animation. Nobody ever should use one of my rigs, though, my rigging skills. They're good enough for me.
I don't know. I checked out your blog. I saw the rigs look nice. There's a nice spider rig on there.
Oh, yeah. Well, so...
the peacock spider?
Well, I started after I got out of school and realized that I was not going to be a rock star. And one of the clues in that was waiting tables, which I'm really terrible at.
Yeah.
Well, actually, this was like in the mid '90s, and so I was kind of like, not sure where to go. And I knew I wanted to get out of the restaurant industry as fast as possible. A lot of other people wanted me to get out of it too. But I've always used computers. Back when I was in high school, I used to write my own little text video games or with some graphics, and I had one where you could pilot the Death Star around and blow up a planet and things like that. So I was getting back into computers. I was doing flyers for a band. I was in an industrial goth band with my brother, and I was doing flyers and that kind of stuff. So I discovered Photoshop, but then I discovered 3D, and it wasn't until I rendered a chrome sphere almost by accident in Ray Dream Studio, which is way before anybody's time. And I remember I had to work a restaurant shift that night, and I went in there to the restaurant with this huge grin on my face. Everybody thought it was crazy. And I was like, I know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. This is it. I've got to make things in 3D on a computer. Yeah. And people had no idea what I was talking about because this was before episode 1 had come out.
Oh wow!
So in terms of the CG world,
it wasn't a widely accepted topic.
It was like it didn't make sense, especially for somebody on the East Coast of Washington D.C., nowhere near the film industry.
Right.
But I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I decided to do everything I could to get out of restaurants and get into CG. And I got very, very lucky in getting a web design job. I taught myself in HTML to kind of BS my way through web design. I got a job at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. It was a very prestigious organization that very few people have heard of. Before, outside of science, before the Gates Foundation, it was the biggest philanthropic organization.
Yeah, I did not know that.
Millions and millions of dollars put in private, not public funds, private money, invested in scientific research, medical biology, and also science education. And they had, at the time, something like 12 Nobel laureates as part of their investigators. Now it's much higher. So I got a job there as an intern, and I immediately hit it off with my friend Satoshi Amagai, who was my supervisor. And he was a neuroscientist who had taught at Cornell, ornithology and zoology and all this kind of stuff. And they really got me into comparative zoology. So my job there was to basically create animations for scientific lectures. And I was there for about 7 years, and I did a wide variety of topics from molecular biology to, the physiology, the heart, bacterial infections, all kinds of stuff. And I was using like Maya on an old Silicon SGI, Maya version 1, and Lightwave and all that kind of stuff. And then I discovered ZBrush. It was about the time that, I had played with it a little bit. I found a demo. That's back when ZBrush was mostly a illustration tool. Right. And then then Lord of the Rings came out, and there's all these stories about people using it on Lord of the Rings. So I started using it, and so around 2005, I said I felt like I had taken my skills as far as I could in terms of scientific visualization, and we were only doing like 1 or 2 animations a year. I wanted to do 1 or 2 animations a week. I still do.
What kind of, as far as those animations, you were a part of the book. It was neuroscience and neurotropics or something. It was something on your Amazon page.
I am.
Well, at least there's an Eric Keller that has a book, Neuroscience and something
I think
other.
that might be a different Eric Keller.
Oh, well, interesting, because it was listed also with all your ZBrush and Maya books.
All right, I'm going to check out
You should check it out, man. There's
maybe I'm smarter than I think.
Yeah, maybe you just don't remember. Like,
I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm in a lab. How the hell did I get here? It's
so all these animations, they exist within just the book format or the digital format, or are they shared with other science organizations?
They are basically part of a website called Biointeractive, and Biointeractive is a push that I helped start with the guys at HHMI. It's still going on, and now it's really strong. It's a tool for teachers. High school teachers around the world, especially the United States. And Biointeractive has a wide number of films, animations, interactives, all designed, and they're available for free for teachers to use to teach biology.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I kind of helped them kind of get that off of the ground. In 2005, I decided I want to go. 2005 was all about me going to LA. I convinced my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, to come out to LA specifically to study at Gnomon, specifically to study with John Brown.
Yeah.
Because I had learned so much from Gnomon online and through VHS tapes, which is
they were doing VHS tapes.
Yes. Kids,
wow.
Ask your grandparents. About
That's so past my time. I mean, I remember the DVDs. I still have a bunch of DVDs. From 10 years ago.
DVDs are obsolete.
Even
now.
that's going back.
So I came out and I had already used Maya for a number of years professionally, and I'd also used ZBrush. I remember I really wanted to study with Meets Muir. He was the other guy that I idolized. So Alex, Meets, and John, I idolized them. So I came out and I started taking classes. I wasn't doing the program because I couldn't afford it, but they were kind of like, well, your Maya skills are a little bit already progressed, so it doesn't make any sense. I'd already published some tutorials in magazines and that kind of stuff. So I just took, I took John's class. I took a number of other classes. And also Maddie Spencer's class.
Oh, yeah.
So I learned a lot from her. And she was teaching texturing with ZBrush, and we became good friends. I helped her get a book deal, and sort of when she went off to New Zealand to work at Weta, she kind of gave me my class. So she said, I want you to take over the intro class. So I started teaching that, and then I put out some DVDs, some videos through Gnomon. I've done like 6 or 7 now. There's probably another one in the works. I think I'd like to update the insect modeling one.
Wow.
With the new ZBrush tools.
Yeah,
and that kind of stuff.
Going back to when I first met you, you were on the beta team for, I believe it was 4R2. That was maybe transition to Dynamesh, and you were sharing all these awesome. I forget what type of ant it was. It's
a leaf cutter. Acromyrmex.
Okay, leaf cutter, because your blog has so many different like species of ants that or subspecies or whatever. How would you determine that the different types of ants?
There are so many. There are thousands and thousands of species of ants. I guess we should talk about ants. Like, what's the big deal with ants?
What's the deal with ants?
Why would anybody want to sculpt ants when you can sculpt awesome hot chicks and robots? And that kind of stuff. Well, I never left the science world. I've kind of gone back and forth between. So sometimes I'll do stuff for scientists. Sometimes I'll do stuff in production, and it's a lot of fun. But I got a project through Digizyme, through my friend Gail McGill, who runs Digizyme. We landed a gig. It was an awesome gig. It was called it was an Apple iPad book, biology textbook, called Life on Earth.
Here we go.
Oh, hey, there's some of my guys.
All right, guys
and gals.
So
we did, so it was a biology textbook, and it was written by Ed Wilson. So if you don't know Ed Wilson, he is the world's greatest entomologist and biologist, and also somewhat of a philosopher. He is the heir to sort of the Darwinian, he's in that caliber. Some people consider him in the caliber of Charles Darwin and that kind of stuff. And luckily, he's with us. He's old. He's still writing books. He's writing like 6 books a year.
Did he write? There's a book that I read. I actually read Darwin's Origin of Species, and then I transitioned to a book. I think it's called 10 Million Aliens or 10,000 Aliens.
Oh, I haven't read that.
It was sort of an extension on Darwin's Origin of Species. Cool. It was a really good book. It went over my head. The first Origin of Species definitely went over my head.
Yeah, that's a hard book to read because it's written in the 19th century.
Yes, it's so difficult to translate the language differences in just English.
And sometimes you're like, just get to the point, man.
Yes, exactly. But I was kind of interested in sort of what you're doing now. It is applying my skills towards something that has meaning, that not only educates people, but this is something that you're very passionate about. And
yeah, and when we got the gig, I said I need to read some of this guy's stuff so I know where he's coming from, and it was a very transformative experience. So he's written a lot of books, The Social Conquest of Earth, which he was working on at the time, but some of the other ones, Biodiversity. So I read these things, and this is the point where I finally realized, okay, this is the artist I'm supposed to be, right? I would love to do like really, really cool characters and all that kind of stuff. I love this stuff that like Justin Goby Fields does and all that kind of stuff. But I realized like those guys have got that covered. It's like writing a love song. There's nothing wrong with a love song, but there's a lot of love songs out there.
Right.
And we need to cover some other material.
Absolutely.
And with ants, starting to read about true social organisms, their biology seems to run counter to everything that we hear about in terms of evolution because individual ants don't pass on their genes. It's only the queen that passes on the genes, and the genes that she passes on is for other ants who don't pass on their genes.
Wow.
This doesn't seem to make any sense. It's something that Darwin struggled with when he studied bees, honeybees, because they're the same kind of thing. But it opens up this door to, the insects and entomology is kind of like a front row seat at evolution. When you study insects and all the varieties of the strategies that insects have developed for survival, there is such a wide array. It to me, reading about insects or evolution, it's like the story of when they discovered Lechuguilla, the huge cave, I think in Mexico.
Oh, yeah.
There's a bunch of cave spelunkers, knock through a little wall, they see a little crevice, and then opens up this massive cave that you can stick, the Empire State Building in or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
That's what I felt like when I started reading these books. And I realized that the diversity out there, the number of subjects that you could cover that barely been touched on and certainly haven't been illustrated is just ripe for CG. And the nice thing about insects, the greatest thing about insects is since they're kind of nature's robots and they're hard surface modeling, but they're also organic modeling.
Right.
There's no skin weights to paint, or very little. That's the thing that I always had with
That's probably pretty nice.
It's one thing to sculpt a person's face, but then to rig it up takes an entire team.
And you do a lot of your own rigging and animation.
Yeah,
so you're doing kind of the entire pipeline.
Yeah.
So,
but insects manage to cut that down by a lot because they're so easy to, you just get a little joint thing.
Do you
going.
have on your art station, do you have links to some of the animations? Like
any place you see a little movie camera there, like that's a good one because that has some of the heavy metal.
Yeah, just as like a demonstration because
so these are my ants that are rendered in Octane, but these are all sculpted in ZBrush, and I think. Do I have a link to them?
These look fantastic. But
you just look at the details right here, and then the other thing is sculpting the inside. So I worked really hard at trying to get, this is part of an animation that explains what happens when a fire ant stings you, specifically Solenopsis invicta. And, the question is do they bite you or do they sting you? Well, the answer is both. So you can see that from this illustration, she is biting to hang on, and also to annoy you, but also stinging you at the same time. And it's so funny. I went to Galapagos last year with my wife, and we were in the area where they have the giant tortoises. Yeah. But they also have fire ants there.
That must have been amazing.
Oh, it was really, really cool. But my wife got really irritated with me because the entire group is following these giant tortoises
around.
And I'm over here. Not only am I poking sticks into the fire ant mounds, I'm trying to get them to sting me. And my wife is convinced that they're going to have to fly me out on a chopper. I'm like, I've read 3 books on fire ants. I know what the hazards are, and it was a little itchy thing. I was actually kind of disappointed that it didn't hurt more.
That's amazing.
But I'd already done this animation, so it was like meeting a celebrity. I'm like, in their hometown.
That's the thing I'm always looking at. I gotta go say hey. They don't know me, but
they still don't like me. But I had actually consulted with a bunch of entomologists. I'd read a bunch of books specifically on fire ants, even on this species Solenopsis invicta. Which was a species that actually Ed Wilson helped to define back when he was 13 years old. So it's kind of insane. This guy was writing papers at 19 and discovering species. So I consulted and I worked really hard at trying to get the interior anatomy correct and also in a way that visualizes it so that people can understand what's going on.
Right.
So if you scroll down a little bit, I think there should be a link to the animation. Yeah. So right here, I actually have that's the molecular structure of the the crystal structure of the allergen that's found in their venom. But yeah, you can watch the animation. And so this is part of a series I've created called Entomology Animated, which is a free series that I've developed online for teachers to use that kind of explore different topics in entomology and biology and evolution. And I also kind of make it kind of goofy and ridiculous. So, and so this is one of my ants that's animated. And you can go ahead and play it. Oh, is it the internet?
It's the buffering's taking a second.
But yeah, this is available on Vimeo. So I kind of did it with my own kind of style, which is kind of, irreverent and casual and not super technical. But also I try to be funny as much as possible. So I was making a joke here about Solenopsis invicta. It's such a cool name.
This is great. I love this.
Band. So I had to make them,
I lost it when I was going through your blog and I was looking at some of these videos. It's educational and entertaining, which is such a great way to present this kind of content. So,
and also I found a use for my guitar degree.
Oh, there you go.
So I worked really hard at making their hands actually move along with the correctly. With
I'm curious. So they hold on. That basically creates balance and allows it's basically more torque or energy to insert the stinger.
Well, also because you're doing this, you're like, oh,
right. So they're holding on. Right.
The other thing that this animation doesn't show, which I would like to do an update, is really reality. You have hundreds on them on your leg or in your arm, because usually they attack you when you disturb their nest. Right. But this is something. So getting back to ZBrush, so we kind of take it a tangent here, but this is something that ZBrush is so specifically and beautifully designed for, is to show the three-dimensional structure in a way that's relatable of how these different parts of the model work. Now, when you do creature design, which is one of my favorite thing to do, the thing is that I originally was like, okay, well, I'm going to invent all my own insects, like a lot of creature designers do.
Right.
But since I have that science nerd kind of quality, I wanted to read about them. The more I read about them, the more I realized we don't know anything about these insects or these organisms. And I realized that nature is so much more interesting than anything that I could come up with. I even came up with these these ecologies of various different insects on another planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I would write out these charts of how they related to the plants. And then I would read, and I realized that nature had already come up with the same idea. And so
it's
I was
funny
just
how you come to those same conclusions.
Yeah, and I was just like, well, screw it. Nature's better than I am. Why don't I just do something that really focuses on teaching people how these cool things work? And if you're a creature designer, this is not just for high school students. If you're a creature designer, I'm hoping that you can look at my animations and get inspired for your own creatures.
Right.
I mean, the alien, the xenomorph from Alien is actually a really boring wasp. If you could show wasps the movie Alien so that they could understand it, they'd be like, yeah, we call that Tuesday, man. That's boring.
That's just a regular day in the wasp.
I know. And
wasps have nests. There's
a much more biodiversity. Ants are related to wasps. They basically branched off from wasps. So you have social wasps and you have solitary wasps and you have a lot of stuff in between. All ants are social.
There is a species of ant that has the similar anatomy to a wasp, correct? That fly?
Yeah. There are also even wasps that don't have wings. The velvet ant is actually a wasp that doesn't have wings. So they're closely related, but there's a bit more diversity in terms of their different strategy with wasps than with ants. Sorry,
there's all kinds of. If you go back to his ArtStation, you had a really great animation for I think it was the peacock spider. This one.
Oh yeah. That one I worked on a lot. They have this mating dance, which is a lot of fun. So I had to try and animate it. And if you scroll down, everything, the tree, everything, that's all ZBrush. The textures. This one was before I got into Substance. So this is all poly paint, which I still do a lot of poly paint. I kind of combine it with Substance.
Yeah.
This one doesn't actually have any audio, but I was kind of like, I got to do a peacock jumping spider dance.
Yeah.
Because they're really amazing. And they really, this doesn't even do them justice.
And you're definitely focused on accuracy as well, as far as movement, the animation, as far as keyframes and everything. You have this very, it's almost like there's no smoothing between it because it's jumpy because they're moving differently because of scale, based on scale and visual. From the human eye perspective.
Well, in terms of animation, because, animation is another amazing skill step, but we've gotten very dogmatic with animation in terms of character animation, that Disney is the end-all, be-all.
Right.
Everyone needs to do the overlapping and squash and stretch, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's only one way to approach animation.
It's a style. It's not a blanket way of doing things.
Exactly. And I always like the Brothers Quay, those really creepy, weird animations.
Oh, yeah,
80s.
yeah.
So insects have that same kind of like, they're all linear or even, stepped keyframes.
Right.
And they move so incredibly fast. And one of the challenges are insects is to get the idea that they're almost weightless because they're so light. And to try and animate that involves doing things that move faster than the human eye can actually perceive.
Right.
Meaning a lot of steps. So it's a cool challenge. I like getting that kind of jittery kind of motion to it and everything. The other thing with spiders that's really interesting is how little we actually know about spiders. In terms of scientists, I do I go to these workshops called the Bug Shot macro photography workshop. So I've been studying macro photography, which is a huge inspiration for my work. My favorite artists actually are not necessarily sculptors or drawers right now. They're photographers. So people like Alex Wilde and Nikki Bay. Oh my God, if you look at his stuff, amazing stuff.
Is it all nature wildlife or is it specifically insects?
Well, these guys are entomologists and photographers.
Okay.
So Alex Wilde actually specializes in ants.
Okay.
There's also John and Kendra Abbott who are in Texas. They specialize in dragonflies. And they have completely different equipment.
What a great time we live in where people that's your career. Like I'm specializing in
they make no money though. That's
it's the most passionate, careers often are the case, or naturally I think they turn into that, or they can. But
if you get some of the other ones like Thomas Shahan is a specialist in spiders, specifically jumping spiders. If you've seen a picture of a jumping spider online, it's probably one of his photographs. And his equipment for a long time, he was just getting them at rummage sales, but he takes pictures that are just unbelievable. But I remember I was at one of these workshops and I asked them how many experts are there in the world on jumping spiders. So keep in mind, we have a population of about 7.5 billion people. They said 50, maybe.
What?
Yeah. We don't know anything about spiders.
Wow.
We know so little about spiders.
I'm blown away by that.
So little about spiders that I'm doing the
So are you taking this? Is this your mandate? Are you answering the call? Is that sort of something you're maybe working towards? Or?
Well, it's tough because I love social insects. I love other insects, but I also like spiders a lot. And there's so much to learn that, if 100 ZBrush artists decided to devote the next 10 years of their lives to exploring insects, we would barely scratch the surface.
Wow.
Because there's so much to talk about, even among just ants, even among subspecies of ants. There's so much there that is ripe for exploration. So I guess my take-home message for this whole conversation as a ZBrush artist, it really comes down to this, going back to sort of a more bigger picture. I think as an artist, you need to find a way to fall in love with your subject. Now, I think this is why we see so many wonderful pictures of sexy women. Is because they're very easy to fall in love with.
Wow, what an interesting
pretty
thing.
girls are always going to get, and not that there's anything wrong with this. I'm not making a judgment at all, but they are a very easy subject because it's easy to fall in love with them when you're working on them. It's easy to fall in love with great artists of it. It's much harder to win somebody over with the head of a fly. But when you're sculpting it and when you're in there, if you can find a way to fall in love with that subject, whether it's a beetle or a hot babe or a robot, find a way to fall in love with it. And that love, it's just like cooking, will come through in your art. People will respond to that. They'll pick up on it. And that's where you really grab people. Some things are going to be a bigger challenge than others. Right. Spiders, people have a natural reaction, a bad reaction to spiders and things like that. So that's going to be a lot harder than sculpting Scarlett Johansson.
It's an interesting point in thinking about just these natural fears. And I don't know if this is culture or socially driven, but maybe since the introduction of horror movies, like for example, you have like this massive fear of sharks, but since Jaws came out, like, was that any different beforehand? Are these influenced by pop culture? Are they influenced by, things that we see? I mean, we all naturally have this sort of fear of spiders for some reason, but they're beautiful creatures and they actually, offer a lot of benefits as far as, killing some of the bugs in your house that you don't want. Or
well, I do think that there is a long history of a fear of that kind of thing, considering how much human disease is driven by insects and things like that. I think it goes back to our evolutionary history.
So you think we're sort of pre-coded based on our evolution or our lineage of experiences that keeps getting passed down?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's getting into sort of like Jungian kind of psychology, but I don't think it's hard-coded the same way that, 5 fingers on each hand is hard-coded.
Right.
But I do think it's very natural and normal for people to have a fear of this kind of thing because, think about it this way. The most dangerous animal on Earth is not a shark. The most dangerous animal on Earth to human beings is a mosquito because they transfer malaria and that kind of thing. So as a survival mechanism, it's probably in our best interest to keep away from creepity-crawly things. Spiders do cause painful bites very, very rarely, much less than most people think, but they do look a lot like ticks and that kind of thing. So if you're thinking in terms of the subconscious fear, it's in our best interest to stay away from it. Plus, the whole idea of constructing this web to catch things is kind of horrifying.
It is. It's very, there is, I don't know, there's just it's like you said, it's a subconscious fear or, survival instinct, I guess, that we all sort of have. But there are those of us that sort of evolve mentally or move beyond the norms, where you're finding beauty in these things that other people find grotesque. And
even Ed Wilson, who's the ant specialist who's been such an inspiration, he's an arachnophobe, so he's scared of spiders. He could still stare at ants all day long. So that kind of, to me, suggests there is something specific about spiders. I mean, I used to have sort of a normal level of fear of spiders. Now I don't have any fear at all. I love them. I think they're awesome. I have several black widows.
Maybe the
in my
conditioning
backyard.
of just doing the artwork, looking at pictures,
it's learning. It's when you learn about something, the more you learn about something, the more your fear diminishes. When you start to realize that spiders don't even know you're there. If you got a spider in your room, it has no idea that you're there or what you are.
Yeah.
And it would be horrified. I think, people are afraid of spiders, but think if you could explain to spiders that we have nuclear weapons, they'd be like, what the hell's going on here, So, I mean, this is something that I want to explore a little bit more. I mean, I have so many ideas for animations that are in the queue. Right now, I'm working with, I have friends at the LA Natural History Museum. This is another advice that I would give to creature modelers is don't just read books, don't just go online, find some scientists, because scientists, what they'll do is they will talk your freaking ear off and you just write down what they say and there's your inspiration. So I have made friends with Emily Hartop, Lisa Gonzalez, and Brian Brown, who are all LA Natural History Museum, and Brian Brown is a specialist in phorid flies. And so right now I'm working on the next episode of Entomology Animated is going to be on ant decapitating flies, which are really interesting organisms that, again, make the alien xenomorph seem pretty boring. There are several different types of flies that specialize in parasitizing ants. Right. So specifically. So you have little ants crawling along, and a lot of times you'll see these very, very tiny flies flying around. And what these guys will do in this specific species, and I can't remember the species name, but it's something very complicated. It will actually go down and land on the ant, on the abdomen, and then use kind of like a stabbing mechanism to inject an egg in between the plates, the tergites of the ant's abdomen, and that the ant will live with a little fly egg growing in it. Wow. And that fly egg, as it grows, it makes its way from the abdomen all the way to the head where it gestates.
Oh, wow.
And so the ant is crawling around and it's got basically a fly larva growing in its head.
Yeah.
Eventually, at that special time, the special time in a fly's life, the ant's head will fall off. And the ant's body will continue to crawl around for a while till it dies. So I'm animating this grisly, wonderful thing, and I've actually put it in a setting. There's a great paper that Brian sent me that was written by a guy around 1900, where he's sitting on his porch and he's observing this headless ant walking around. And he looks around, he finds the head, and the head is crawling. And the head is crawling because it's got a fly pupa in it that's making its way.
Wow.
And it's kind of using it as
That is fascinating.
So I'm like about halfway through animating this thing, and it's going to be a lot of fun, I think. And I'm going to make it free online. This is just something that I'm doing for fun.
And this project, I mean, I was actually just at the Natural History Museum here in LA this past weekend, and I was on, do are you doing this remotely, or do you actually work outside of the History Museum?
Well, this is definitely a personal project, so I'm not making any money off of it at all. So I do most of it. I have a very nice home studio, courtesy of some really cool projects that I worked on.
Yeah, I've seen some pictures on Facebook. It looks...
ZBrush actually paid for my house, but I give a shout out to ZBrush.
Shout out to ZBrush.
I can't complain when things go wrong at ZBrush because it paid for my house, my studio, after years of hard work.
Sure, of course.
But no, I work remotely, and I have a little studio as a sort of separate detached house. And then I'll go and visit them, the Natural History Museum, and they'll take me in the back. They have a huge collection of flies, and I go to the bug fairs.
Well, the reason I asked, I was hoping that this was the case, but I went up to the second floor. It was right next to the birds. There was the birds exhibit they have up there that has the sort of like fake environment that they built. It's a beautiful setup.
I always get lost in there.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was there for like 4 hours.
I literally get lost. I can't find the exit.
But they had a section where they have glassed off labs.
Yeah.
And there was a picture, there was a note that said something along the lines of like, Eric's stuff, don't touch.
Oh, no, that's not.
And
me.
I was like, I hope that's Eric's.
That's probably no. Those are the dinosaur guys. If I had, I don't have any offices there, but I have my friend Emily work there, and my friend Terry and Lisa and Brian, and so I'll go and hang out with them a little bit. And Brian, for my bombardier beetle animation, I did an animation where I show the bombardier, going around torching little ants. My ants get tortured in my animations quite a bit, but.
Just a rough life overall. I think it's unavoidable, right?
No, ants rule the world. Ants are second in line to inherit the earth, so don't feel too bad for the ants. Next to humans. Once we're gone, ants are taking over.
Louis Tucci and I have been discussing he's obsessed with the coyote, or the what is the subspecies now? The coy wolf.
Oh yeah,
the coy wolf.
Well,
who are very elusive, very difficult to kill. Actually,
very very difficult kill, but enough ants will probably take them out.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, so. But Brian will take me back into their shelves, and so he helped me find the exact beetle that I used, and so I'll take that home.
Wow, so you actually you're going there collecting reference, live reference.
There's nothing like actual 3D reference, but even then, so he's given me a fly model for this ant decapitating fly animation, and even then, even though I have it on my microscope and I'm looking at it and I'm sculpting and I have all this picture reference, and I spend hours and hours and hours just trying to get this stuff right.
Yeah.
And then I'll show it to him, and he'll say, well, you got some things that are wrong and some things that are really wrong. He's yet to say you got that right. Wow. Because it takes an expert eye. Now, this is why I say for creature modelers, get to know a scientist.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that are going to be able to tell you what you have is right or what you have is wrong. Because it's hard to tell where the fly begins and where it ends.
Yeah.
And what parts of the genitals and what parts of the legs.
Well, accuracy
so alien,
in the scientific community, especially, or specifically, the accuracy of even, I'm sure, dimples and skin detail and thickness of, the space between the thorax and the, these other parts. It's you're sort of inclined to be accurate. So it's
well, form follows function. So like in this one right here with that's the leaf cutter ant. If you look at it, they have all these dimples and pores and stuff on their surface, which originally it kind of looks like, okay, well, that's a neat detail of a sculpt, but it actually serves a purpose, because essentially it allows the leaf cutters who are farming fungus in their nest, right? They have a symbiotic relationship with this fungus. So ants actually invented agriculture 30 million years before we even showed up. And so they basically had these fungus farms underground. And the big enemy to both the ants and the fungus is bacteria. So they actually have beneficial bacteria that cling to their bodies, that as it clings to their body, it helps to sterilize the fungus from the bad bacteria. So now you have 3 levels of symbiosis going on here, and it goes on even higher than that. There are other species of insects that will sometimes live in the there's another animation that I really want to do. There's a type of beetle that basically fools the ants based on the chemical signals that it gives into allowing them to live in the colony. So these ants are doing their thing, and there's a giant beetle right in their living room, and they're not even aware of it because they don't see, they smell.
Right.
What they smell is like a big version of them.
Yeah.
And this is a really interesting, this is what I love about evolution, because it's so much beyond survival of the fittest. It's much more complex than we learn when we're younger. And I was telling, it was my friend Alex Wild, who's one of the photographers that I admire. I was talking to him about that. I was like, can you imagine if we had a creature living in our house that wasn't even our species?
Yeah.
And he just said, you got a dog? And I was like, oh, he's right. You know, it's like,
didn't
the
think of
dog's
that.
figured it out, you know? So there's a lot of like really, really cool stuff in there. There's so much in nature that needs to be explored. I know we've been kind of rambling on about
No,
this.
no.
You know,
I mean, I
talk
think
about
it's a good topic of discussion, especially going back to creature design, character design, sort of all those things that you're doing in visual effects production, you know, for all these movies. This is sort of it's more widely accepted now as a design strategy, but formerly, I mean, it was very uncommon to have somebody like a Tara Whitlatch who she looks to, you know, creatures from the sea and all kinds of crustaceans and you know, looking at just silhouette and things that exist in nature, and those are things that are infused in her design. And I would imagine you having a passion in studying these things and getting to know these scientists. Does that help you with your design process just as an artist too, departing from just insects?
Yeah, it pays off. Like the Cloverfield Lane one is a good example where, you know, they showed me the model and I knew, I saw basically the creature in my head pretty much instantly when they showed it to me, and I knew how to create the details that I wanted to create, mainly because of spending so much time studying insects. And Terrell's a good example because she professionally spent a lot of time studying, I believe, dinosaurs and that kind of stuff. I mean, she did that professionally alongside doing her sort of fantastic creature design.
Right.
So she has that mental, it's just like with a figure artist, you know, you study figure drawing for years and years and years. What you're doing is you're building up that library so that when you can pull it out, you need to sculpt an ear or draw an ear without a reference, you can do that.
Right.
And it's the same thing with, like, I'm familiar enough with the general anatomy of ants and beetles and that kind of stuff that I could probably sculpt a decent one without too much reference.
Right.
You get into, you know, there's so much more diversity in insects that you still have to study some of the other ones. And some of my older artwork I kind of cringe at a little bit.
Well, we all do, right?
Like, I know.
Yeah, but it's all fantastic. It's all really great artwork, and it's, I mean, I don't know enough about this to even, I couldn't say what's right and what's wrong. It looks real, and it's something that exists in the real world that I love. And it's interesting, like this whole wave of 3D artists and sculptors, and you look at just the development in just movies, for example, sci-fi specifically. You go back to movies from the 80s and 90s and the kinds of designing that was being done with practical effects, and then now this transition into the digital world, and people are becoming more savvy to this concept.
Yeah.
It's amazing, just the creatures and aliens and the things that are being developed. You know, eventually we get bored with the same stuff, and like you get bored with just human physiology and human anatomy, so you depart from that and you add extra limbs, or you go the Tara Whitlatch route, or like more recently I can think of is what was the movie with where the aliens come, where there's a communication barrier?
Arrival?
Arrival, which I thought was a fantastic movie as far as linguistics are concerned, but also the design of the creatures was very interesting. It was sort of squid-like, but, you know, and they have these sort of ink projections. It's interesting, and I wonder, as we're sort of exponentially growing as far as the kind of stuff we're coming up with. I mean, you've seen just like ZBrush Central Art Station, the kind of stuff that people are doing. I just wonder where it's going to go, you know?
Well, I think the problem that people have to realize, you know, and for young people getting into this industry is you can't count on the industry is going to be static. You know, I'm old, so I've grown up and I've seen the comic book industry go through massive waves. You talk to anybody who's been in that industry, it's gone from basically, you know, the dustbin where nobody was interested in it at all to, and animation's done the same thing, to completely taking over the culture.
Yeah.
And you look at previous art forms such as opera. You know, opera in the 19th century was the dominant art form, and everybody went to see operas. Now it's very much a niche kind of thing. The same thing is going to happen with sci-fi. There's going to be a certain point where we feel like we've exhausted all our possibilities, and we're going to say, well, where do we go next? And we have to start looking at what's going on in the situation of the world, because that's what's going to guide us. Sci-fi has a great possibility. Basically, good science fiction, what it does is it's writing the history of the future.
Right.
It's telling us where we need to go.
It inspires innovation and inspires us to actually develop those things.
Yeah, and it just like when we look to the past, we imagine what people were doing or what they were thinking in the past.
Right.
It's the same thing with the future. What we're doing, we're projecting what things are going to happen in the future. Some things are very scary. Most things in sci-fi are very scary.
See, all these ZBrush artists are like, you're doing people a service. Right?
No, you really
Keep
are.
doing it.
Because if you look at like a movie like Rogue One is basically telling us how to deal with a totalitarian state. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. What a great point.
How do you look up and see the imperial flag? You just don't look up.
Yeah, that was actually a quote.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah.
So the sci-fi and fantasy do have an extremely important role in our society, but in terms of a career as an artist, a CG artist, you have to figure out what's going to carry you not through the next 5 years, but what's going to carry you through 20 to 30 years. And if you look at the people who've had a career that has spanned 20 to 30 years, it's like rock musicians. There's only a handful of them.
Yeah.
And you look at, like, one of my main inspirations is Neville Page. I love his stuff.
Yep.
I love him as a person. Not literally. I've only talked to him a few times, but I admire him greatly for the kind of stuff he does, but also his approach. He always has a reasoning behind whatever he does. And if you notice what he's been doing lately, he's much more interested in dealing with the natural world and conservations and those kinds of things, which are topics that I'm really interested in. So as artists, we need to start to take up the mantle and say, what's the next important thing? Is it to constantly entertain ourselves? Again, there's nothing wrong with entertainment, but it does become sort of a dead end if it's just an end in itself.
Right.
We have to basically take entertainment and entertainment art and design and figure out how to use it to solve the big problems that we're going to be facing. And those are things like, a rapidly changing climate. How are we going to change where we get energy?
Right.
How are we going to deal with the fact that we are in the midst of a mass extinction comparable to the asteroid hit that wiped out the dinosaurs? How are we going to deal with things like, what we've done to the natural world, what we can repair, what we should repair, and what we should just let go.
Right.
And that starts with, I think, if artists start to devote some of their time and energy to, especially creature artists, to the natural world beyond just using it as reference, then you're going to start to find, there's so many possibilities, that there's more sources of inspiration than any one person can handle.
Right.
And like I say, I could devote the rest of my life to just doing ants and still have more than I can handle.
Yeah. So are you putting a call out to all these ZBrush artists?
I am. I'm saying,
no more superheroes and monsters. Let's just do... We're saving the world.
Yeah, I know. ZBrush can save the world. I just like any other artist, I have a big ego and I want to say, hey, this is my turf, stay away from it. But that's ridiculous. What we need to be is, I started thinking when I devoted my extra spare time to doing science animation, I'd like to make a name for myself among some of the other people that I admire. So you get in that competitive spirit, which is natural as an artist.
It is natural, and I think it's a good introduction or a good facet to have in a creative environment. It's important.
It is important. But wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody was competing? What would be the net effect if all the ZBrush artists were competing to do the best representation of the natural world? It would be good.
Yeah. Overall, you're producing something that's good. Yeah. So the competition fuels quality or something that's positive.
And insight into to how to solve some of the bigger problems.
Yeah, that's a great point. This is something I was voicing to you as we're getting so big into, just big blockbuster movies these days. What's popular is, action, sci-fi, but it's still centered around comics and superheroes and all of that. But what I love and appreciate so much about your work is that you have this passion for, offering this thing that may end up, giving somebody else inspiration to do it themselves, or help us solve a problem, or as far as the scientific community. I mean, I can only imagine how many places your stuff is being shared, because
I don't know.
Well, I mean, in the scientific community, how many people have animations of these particular spiders, and how many, it's got to be a very niche, like you said, there's only 50 people that would be considered, the top, people that know peacock spiders. So it's just fascinating.
Somebody told me that they dropped my name at an entomology conference, and that was huge for
That's
me.
awesome.
Like, that's
I actually,
cool.
while you were describing that, I have an idea I think that you'd be perfect for. Have you seen Bill Nye's new Netflix show?
No, I need to watch it.
You got to watch it. It's amazing. But he had they were demonstrating Tilt Brush, Google's Tilt Brush.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just, it was it was centered around video games, but we got to get you on there with ZBrush and just you guys can nerd out and talk about insects.
He's in Pasadena.
I guarantee you it would be one of the coolest episodes ever. So we got to somehow get this to Bill Nye.
I would love to do that. I would absolutely love to do that. I think, the interesting thing about I know we're going on. It's probably a little bit long here.
No, this is fine.
You can edit this stuff, right?
We can go as long as we want.
Well, it's interesting you brought up Tilt Brush because I'm very interested in virtual reality. It's something that I've explored. I've already done some VR projects at Otoy, which is where I'm working at right now. But I'm also interested in seeing how VR is going to be useful for science education. So I use Tilt Brush now as a storyboarding tool.
Oh, wow.
So, because I want to figure out...
On a regular basis?
I started to use it for an entomology animated episode that's going to focus on insect vision. So I threw on the Tilt Brush thing late at night and... in a nice blank canvas and started to figure out, okay, well, this is where I want the ant. There's nothing like drawing an ant that's 4 times larger than you are.
Yeah.
But I just scribbling. The eventual models, of course, are going to be done in ZBrush,
right?
Because that is my favorite medium.
We got to shout out the original, the OG ZBrush hats, man.
This is all faded.
ZBrush dad hats.
Blue.
I got the 2.0, which there's only 2 of these. My coworker Ernest and I are the only ones that have fitted hats. We got some snapbacks too, but
you got to start making some shoes. But so I've been using Tilt Brush, and I've also been studying Unreal as a development. There's a few things on here that on my ArtStation page that use Unreal. That real-time rendering is where the future is.
I saw it was a clip of your Klingon warrior female sculpt that was in VR, and you had it in, I think, Unreal 4, right?
Yeah. I'm still working on that model. I don't know if it's got problems.
Yeah, no, well,
she's very butch. She is a Klingon.
Well, I mean, Klingons, that's tough, man. It's a very, masculine race.
Well, somebody told me that it was too ogre-like, and I'm like, what is attractive? Listen, I'm a huge Trekkie, and I get to work on Star Trek Beyond again.
Yes, which I want to talk about that.
Yeah, but with Klingons, that's a great thing. You have to look culturally. What's attractive to a Klingon? I think I've watched Deep Space Nine a few times, and I'm talking about all 9 seasons.
Yeah.
So I know what Worf was looking for in a lady. So I was trying to go for that. And I was thinking, I think she's down there, right there. She's pretty.
Well, and this isn't even. I think your blog has a more. Is this the most updated version?
This is ArtStation. This is actually more up to date than my blog.
Okay.
I got to update it. And I need to go to my ZBrush Central page. I know Jaime's going to be like, why haven't you updated that? And I'm like,
he's on it. He's on it.
It's got some really old stuff on there. But let's talk a little bit about Star Trek, because that was a really cool use of ZBrush.
Yeah, as far as that transition, because you're doing all the entomology stuff is your passion project, and it's sort of been since your CG lifelong pursuit, basically.
Yeah.
And then now with your experience at Bad Robot, what has that been like for you as far as design work and what kind of stuff do you get to do there?
Sadly, Bad Robot closed its visual effects, which is Kelvin Optical. This no longer exists. So JJ is moving on to doing other things related, I think,
save that shirt then.
Stuff. Oh, yeah, this is a sacred
It's a collector's item.
Yeah, it's such a great experience, though. I mean, I really miss it. Some really great parties. I walked past Idris Elba one day at a party.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a little scary.
It's scary.
But so with what was really cool about Star Trek Beyond is so the problem is they filmed the entire movie, and if you've seen it, there are sort of stormtrooper-like henchmen that they're robots that basically the bad guy has reprogrammed to do his bidding, and they filmed the entire thing with people in practical outfits. And then when they were watching it, they were like, "These guys look silly. They just didn't work.
Yeah.
Something about the outfits was just not working." So they decided, like, okay, so let's replace them digitally, all of them throughout the entire film.
Wow.
And I had made it no secret that I was a Trekkie while I was there.
Sure.
We were finishing up Cloverfield Lane, and what I do in front of everybody as much as possible is sculpt like Ferengi, just so people were aware that I was interested.
Wait till somebody comes around. Then,
yeah, it wasn't a very good Ferengi model, but it didn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
People were walking past, and
that's
so
a Trekkie.
somebody was kind of like, "Hey, would you like to work on Star Trek?" I'm like, "Please."
Smart.
So
take note, people. That's, that's how you get attention.
Make your desires known.
Pandering to your audience sometimes helps.
But then of course, what did they say? Like, okay, well, we got a couple weeks now, and we're going to redo the robot. So we want you to work on the model. So I worked with a concept artist named Nick Hyatt, who's great, also a ZBrush artist, and a real joy to work with. And he's done a lot of cool stuff. Nick is really cool, and he worked on he does a lot of video game stuff, and he also got to work on Force Awakens. Lucky bastard!
Oh, so lucky!
And he's a huge Star Wars nerd. So they tasked him with coming up with a new design, and he worked really hard at coming up with all these different designs. And then I was working with the art director, is this guy G Young, who's a really good friend of mine, another great ZBrush artist, and so we worked together along with the producers coming up with this design. And so in ZBrush, in terms of the technical aspect, they gave me a scan of the original practical model, the person in the suit, and I brought this in as a subtool. And I basically kind of used for the sort of César kind of style silhouette modeling.
Oh, okay. You're doing layers or just silhouette sculpting?
I did some silhouette sculpting. So what I had to do is I had to make sure that the model completely covered the original practical model.
Right.
But not too much because you can't make it too bulky. Mm-hmm. So this is where subtools came in really helpful. So I had a subtool of the original scan model. Then I used a Dynamesh version on top of that. Plus I used Nick's art, and I used that in Lightbox, so I could have that directly over my model.
Right.
So these three things together, can't do this anything other than ZBrush, folks. This is why ZBrush is so helpful. And I got to sculpt, so I had these orthographic views that were basically Photoshop comps that Nick had done. That not all the ideas were fleshed out. Or fleshed out. So I had to kind of figure out where the other details, those foggy areas that were just basic paint strokes in Photoshop, figure out what those were. And so I spent like a week and a half doing it. It was a lot of fun. It was tough. I realized I still stink at boots. For some reason I have a hard time
boots specifically, huh?
Boots drive me crazy. I can sculpt hands pretty well. I love sculpting hands.
That's one of the hardest things for people is hands and faces.
Well, the hands because I spend so much
right. Maybe that's this real world training. There's nothing better than real world experience that drives your style. I think
and feet are just ugly hands, but I stink at them for some reason, and they're like polar opposites for me. So I struggle with the boots, and then of course you end up seeing the boots for half a second in the movie.
Right.
But anyways, it was a lot of fun, and then I worked with Nathaniel Morgan, who did a lot of the texturing on it and all that kind of stuff. So that was a lot. That was a lot of fun.
Would you mind showing it? Because I know you have it in your reel.
How do we get to the? Yeah, if you could pull up my ArtStation page.
Is it on your ArtStation?
Yeah,
page?
it is. If you play my reel, it's in the first part. Of course, I put it the first thing on my reel. I'll show you which one to click on. Pull that sucker over there.
If you
click on the heavy metal ant down here, this one, and it'll pull up my reel, and so we can, and you go ahead and play that. It will show, first my goofy intro. I'm really terrible at promoting myself. I really got to work on my reel some more.
Well, that's the thing with CG artists is like, how do you present your demo reel? Some people go flashy, some people just go straight to the, this is what it is. This is all you care about.
Unfortunately, due to security, I wasn't able to get any of the ZBrush models themselves, so I just basically grabbed clips of the movie.
Yeah.
But at least it shows. So the Marauder robot is what I worked on. So that's my ZBrush sculpt right there, beating up Uhura.
Yeah.
It's so cool to see it rendering, and model. And it's so nice because I feel like an intimate connection with every detail on that model because I remember specifically what I was doing when I was sculpting it. And it is a really neat model.
It's a great character. I don't know if this was it sort of gave that, like Ant said, sort of that hive mentality because they're almost like drones.
Yeah. It would be nice if they don't have as much personality as stormtroopers. Here's some other stuff though that I did in ZBrush. So a lot of these underground structures are ZBrush and Maya models, and also I did a lot of rocks. And there's nothing more Star Trek than rocks. I always think of kind Captain Kirk.
Showed the old the old set days when they just are like in a room like this, and it's supposed to be like a far off planet.
Well, yeah. So I'd love to somebody do a movie where they actually go to a planet where the rocks are styrofoam.
Didn't they make fun of that in Galaxy Quest, where Tim Allen fights a rock monster?
Oh yeah, but they need to do the styrofoam rock monster. But we did a lot of rock bridges, and that was a lot of ZBrush, Decimation Master, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I used that. So if you see some of these bridges down here, so I did a lot of these structures right here. Not my design, but they are my models. You can see a lot of greebles and stuff, and then a lot of these rocks that they're walking on. So that's kind of neat. My ZBrush robots walking on my ZBrush
that's it. I mean, do you ever get tired of that?
Oh, there's the 10
yes, this was the shot you were describing where she throws
so
the
there's the
Molotov
monster
cocktail.
that I got to go nuts with for 10 Cloverfield Lane.
So cool.
And just, they did a great job on the dynamics there and all that kind of stuff.
You guys did such a great job.
That was such a fun movie.
Yeah.
In terms of rocks, I did some stuff. It's not on my demo reel. I think that's
pretty much it.
But I have to add it. I did some stuff for Power Rangers. This is some of my Unreal work with the Beatles, by the way.
Oh yeah, this is so great. It's an actual confrontation. Like there's a battle scene.
Well, Bombardier Beetles don't actually shoot flames out of their butt, so I made like a pretend video game, just to mess with people's heads.
It's so
but
cool.
This is what they look like, and there's my ants and stuff. But so I worked with my friends at Filmograph. Got to give a shout out to them. I've done a lot of work with them before. And we did the end animation sequence to Power Rangers. So I did a lot of rocks and crystals for that, which is some great artists on that. Mm-hmm. And it looked really nice. We went to see the movie together, so I sat through the Power Rangers. And then
I was going to ask you, because I just watched it recently since we were going to do this podcast. I was surprised. It was shockingly good. It was pretty good. I mean, it's generally speaking, but it could have been a lot worse, but it was like visually speaking, movies nowadays they're always great. But
if you're going to invest, I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars into a movie, you hope that they do a good job of it.
Yeah,
and I think they did. I mean, we just all we did was the end sequence, but it was a lot of late nights sculpting rocks and crystals, and it's sort of incorporating a lot of Megascan stuff with my own stuff. And a great thing about Megascans, which I give a shout out to them, I love them. I think they're really great. When you download a lot of their models, they include alphas and sometimes the ZBrush brushes and also the Z tool. And so that was really helpful. I mean, we did a lot of original work in there, but
of course
it did cut down a lot of times for these end sequences, animations on movies, it's the last thing they work on. So the timeline on those things is really short. So you use whatever tools you can.
Sure.
So that was a lot of fun.
You're under the time crunch issue.
But I never get tired of rocks. Rocks are
well, arguably one of the fastest things that you could do at ZBrush. I mean, just being able to preview surface noise now while you're sculpting before applying, such a great feature. Yeah. Just one thing that you can just, a little H polish, a little trim dynamic, some surface noise.
My favorite thing with surface noise is actually mask by noise. So I'll come up with a really cool design on there, and then rather than applying it to the surface, I'll turn on mask by noise. It's a little bit different in terms of the result, but then you can go in and sculpt variations on top of it.
Right. It'd be a good way to apply paint details as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I use that same sort of approach with, masking peaks and valleys. After you go through and lay a bunch of, sort of general skin details, you can apply those masks and then go through and pick out parts for painting or sculpting.
The smooth peaks brush is, I always call it the Twin Peaks brush.
Twin Peaks brush. That's great.
That's great when you do that kind of thing, because you get such beautiful pore detail out of it. When you're using that. That's one of my favorite techniques. I'm some of my other favorite ZBrush techniques. If we want to talk about ZBrush, I love the overall clay polish. When you apply that, I was trying to explain it to somebody online the other day, because when you say you've sculpted out your model and it looks kind of marshmallowy, and then you hit that clay polish and it just tightens everything up, but it leaves that great mask. So what I'll do is I'll invert that mask and then hide it, and then use that to kind of reorganicize some of
those edges. Nice. That's a good workflow. I haven't tried that. I'm gonna have to give that a try.
That's a fun one. And then the spiral brush is my latest addiction. With a really big brush size. Sorry for hitting the microphone. Really big brush size, really low Z intensity. It's a great way to add some structure that you might not think of otherwise.
Oh, so you mean as far as like a move move tool.
Yeah, like a variation of move. Oh, and then
yeah.
the other day I was playing with throwing just a simple alpha on it, and then you get the really kind of cool warbly kind of neat details.
There's almost infinite combinations of things if you consider playing around with strokes and then alphas, and so I'll do something similar like you were saying with the slide brush with the snake hook. Using snake hook because it has that very natural, dynamic, sort of elastic kind of feel.
Yeah.
Whereas the move brush is much more tight and controlled if you reduce your Z intensity.
Yeah, and to say, if there was one thing I could point out that ZBrush still seems to be way ahead of everybody else, aside from a lot of their interesting tools. ZBrush is a work of art in itself. I'm totally I'm big shout out to Ofair. But hey, you guys helped me pay for my house, so I got to pay it back.
It's paying it forward. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. But ZBrush is a work of art. It's an experimental tool. It's always meant to be an experiment, always will be an experiment. And that's what I think frustrates a lot of people in production. But at the same time, I'm just embrace it, because that's where you're going to get the cool stuff. Because it's the brushes are so much powerful than they are in other competing tools, such as Mudbox. I'm a big Maya user. Maya's got some interesting sculpting tools. Do they compete with ZBrush? Not at all, because the amount of customization you can do to the ZBrush brushes. So for new ZBrush users or people that are looking for something new to do or expand their workflow, open up the brush palette and start playing with things. Don't worry about the technical aspects of what those things do. Just mess with them.
Well, and where it is now, once we release R8, we have some new exciting things, even more to add for brushes.
To school when that happens, that's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you. I mean, I've never gotten the full story of your background as far as where this fascination with insects comes from. So as far as that's concerned, and you're still working in the professional visual effects industry always, but you're continuing to teach and you're doing all this entomology animation or animated project. Mm-hmm. So, what's on the horizon for you? Have you figured out that thing that you're working towards yet, or is it just because I just wanted to make the point that you're the person that figured out you have appreciated the journey. Yeah, you really have no goal.
The journey is such an LA thing to say.
It really is, but I feel like it's so important for people to embrace, because there's so many people that struggle with, happiness or whatever that thing is not the goal. It's not a finish line. It's it's a lifetime pursuit of art or whatever.
Well, when you're younger, especially an artist, there's an idea that I really need to get a job in the industry.
Yeah.
And that's normal. We all got to eat. The industry is tough. It's a grind. It is not necessarily the key to happiness, because you're not always doing what you want to do. But at the same time, when you get a paycheck because you got to ZBrush all day, that's a wonderful thing. It's certainly it beats a lot of other jobs.
I agree.
But in terms of people are always saying, artists, you always say, well, you got to work on personal projects. To me, that's saying you got to breathe. No kidding. Everything that I do is really just a vehicle to support my personal projects, because that's where I get that's where I learn to fall in love every night when I work on it late at night. And so on the horizon, I would like to, now that I'm very well established and very secure in my skills as being a CG artist. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon, hopefully. In terms of what I want to do next is, since I tend to sort of oscillate between science and entertainment industry, I'm moving that pendulum, I think, a little bit back towards science. I want to explore that area. It's been a little bit tough lately because the money kind of sort of went, in terms of science but with this March for Science and all that kind of stuff, it's getting renewed interest in Bill Nye's things. So I would like to get back into that a little bit more. My interest in terms of entomology has not diminished. I got the bug probably about around 2010 or so, and it's just increasing. If I read a textbook, and I'm talking a really dry textbook on something like insect respiration, I get so excited I can't finish reading because I want to go model that and sculpt it. And so For right now, what I would like to do, my goal is to streamline my process for creating entomology animated episodes so that it doesn't take me so long. Because right now it's still taking months and months and months. And I would like to be able to churn out a new episode. If I could do a new episode every month, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
But right now I'm not quite there yet, mainly because I still have to put food on the table.
Sure.
And so
something we all struggle with as artists, right? We have so many creative passions, projects that we want to do, but it's, sometimes they don't pay out, or they, it's a long-term commitment.
But, and you never know, like a good story is I made one of my ant models I made for fun a few years ago. And then a studio called me up while I was working at Bad Robot and said, hey, we want to hire you for a freelance project. I'm like, I'm not leaving Bad Robot anytime soon. Yeah. What's the project? We need an ant. And I'm like, what kind of ant? Like, we need a leaf cutter. I've got a leaf cutter, fully textured, fully rigged, that I did for fun 2 years ago. And I sold it to him for like $3,000.
See, well,
which, and I paid for a laptop.
Sure, exactly, and it's I think there's something to be said about applying those skills to things that have many various uses or may have. I mean, it's all efforts that are in sort of the positive direction. If you think of it that way, it may present something you didn't think of. Yeah, and at the time.
I think artists don't appreciate how much they can control the conversation we're creating. Whether it's ZBrush Central or ArtStation, we're telling people what we want to do. We're telling studios what interests us. The smart studios are the ones that look on ArtStation and say, because that's where we have the fan base for the art.
Right.
So when you're on ArtStation or ZBrush Central, obviously you put the stuff that you're passionate about. Don't just put the stuff that's going to get you a job. I think that's the main thing that I would say. It's like, put the stuff that really drives you. Do a little things that will get you some work if you need to. But for the most part, when you get the time, put the stuff that really drives your passion, because that is a one way that will trickle upwards. And people will start to see that, at Monsterpalooza or whatever. Yeah. And these are the projects that we need to make, because this is where the interest is. If you can do that and also do something that actually has a positive contribution to the world, whatever that might be, whether it's an interest in human rights, to biology, to conservation, to whatever, that's even a better plus. And I think that we need to expand what we can do with CG beyond just fantasy and sci-fi, because that's what's dominating the culture right now. Right. Again, not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
I would never fault for somebody for doing that kind of stuff. But there is so much potential for the tools in terms of visualization, in terms of communication. There's a kind of a CG literacy that has evolved now that you and I are both teaching people that have been using Photoshop since elementary school. Right. That's not something that happened when I started. There is a literacy, a language that they have that they're communicating, and we need to use that to actually start to express ideas beyond just cool guns.
Such a great philosophy. Well, those are the kind of thoughts that are, going to change the world of people. I think people will naturally start to open themselves up. I mean, we can only do the same things for so long. It's especially with the way that the industry works, and what pop culture, sort of gives us and sets that tone. So, and
it's scary. There are AI right now that can do texturing for games. So, and when you think about things like outsourcing, we talk about factories like car factories or air conditioning factories, how they're moving the factories to Mexico. Well, for CG artists, they can outsource us with the click of a button. Right. That's all it takes. Sign a contract and your job is just moved over to another country. Yeah. And it's very scary.
It is. And I think it puts that's even more of a reason to have more of a desire to study things like anatomy and nature and be a real true designer, because you cannot, that's something that we own as humans, is that creative input where we can sort of cognitively process all that and come up with these abstract concepts that weren't something before, exactly. And it's important to be creative and not just, copy, copy and repeat, copy and repeat.
Sculpt something in ZBrush that expresses an idea is really hard. But also much more rewarding. Yeah. Beyond just something that looks really neat.
It's great advice.
For anybody who's actually sat through this whole podcast, ramble.
There better be plenty of people, because this is gold.
Next time you have some free time, you pull up ZBrush. Think of an idea that you want to convey. It could be anything. Yeah. The more abstract income inequality or something like that. How would you
get
sculpt
creative.
something at ZBrush that expresses that?
Yeah.
You can do it. It just takes a little bit of thought, a little bit of exploration,
Sure.
or whatever. And I think that would be really, really cool.
That's a great idea. Somebody please take up that that call.
And some people have done it, admittedly, but there needs to be more of that.
More, definitely.
So I think that would. I guess that's where I'm going to leave this.
All right, well, that's a good place to leave it. As we're winding down here, is there anything else you want to mention, or we can show as far as places where people could contact you? I think it's Bloopatone is your handle for most social medias.
I decided to pick something that is ridiculously hard to spell and remember.
It's great.
I don't know. Maybe it's my way.
It is Bloopatone, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to. It's my nickname.
I've always remembered it, so it works. It's perfect.
I had a dog named Blue, and that's what we used to call her.
Ah, okay.
It's actually a pun because Zipatone is what they used to use in the old comics to create shading.
Oh, okay. So you're combining your old dog's name in that. That's so amazing. I wanted to ask you that, actually. It's perfect.
I got sick of trying to come up with a cool name, so I just said, screw it. What do I call my dog? I'll just use that.
Well, you're on ZBrush Central at Bloopatone. You can just Google ZBrush Central Bloopatone. Bloopatone.
Yes, you got it. I think my ZBrush handle is Robot Ball, which there's another story behind that.
Oh, okay.
But I need to change it or update it.
I don't know if I want to ask that question.
At some point later today, I'm getting an email from Jaime, and it's going to say, why haven't you updated your ZBC page?
Yeah.
And I'll be like, you're right.
It would be great if you could share the entomology stuff, and when that's going to be completed, I'm sure people can find that on your website or on your blog.
Yeah, and I need to post. I know that some of the stuff that I did for Power Rangers is online, so my friends at Filmograph have that, so I'll post that.
Please. After this, by the time this podcast airs, it'd be perfect if that stuff's out. People all our listeners can check out all your work.
Yeah, but yeah, either ArtStation Bloopatone or my website bloopatone.com or ZBrush Central. If you look up Robot Ball or Eric Keller, I'm sure you'll find it. Or just ants. I don't know.
Ants. Yeah. Eric Keller bugs. Yeah. And you're golden.
The one place that I would like to send people, definitely go to Facebook and look up the Facebook entomology animated page.
Check it out, people. That's cool. You know what? I'm so impressed, and it's inspiring to see these kinds of projects. Fun, and you're definitely one of a kind. You're a very inspiring person, and I think hopefully a lot of our user base will pick up some of those tips and tricks that. I'm telling you, man, that's gold.
I appreciate you saying that I'm one of a kind, but I do have a twin brother, and he is a ZBrush.
Oh, that's right. Actually, except for the fact that he has a twin brother. My
twin brother, Travis, is actually learning how to use ZBrush to do children's books. So that's kind of cool.
Oh, that is very cool.
Yeah, he's getting good at it.
Well, we're going to have him on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in, man. We appreciate it.
Me. Thanks to Louis Tucci for
dropping Louis Tucci. All right,
has he been on yet?
Louis Tucci has not been on, but we probably should. He's in the wheelhouse for sure. It's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. I have to mentally prepare for that interview because that's going to be, the can of worms, like multiple cans of worms are going to be opened. I think the last time he's been coming in the office still because he's at Gnomon, he's teaching with you, and he comes in every once in a while and just, barges into our offices and breaks our concentration just because he likes to. And
did you say your full name? It's never Solomon. It's Solomon Blair.
Yeah, no. Well, he's got nicknames for everybody. So it's like I think he calls me. He used to make fun of me, and like when we were starting before we got to ZBrush Live days, we were doing the Channel Z. That was sort of the first sort of pitch project, which didn't work out at the time. But he was sort of doing the Hollywood thing, like not remembering my name, so he'd call me Sammy. So he still calls me Sammy. Hey, Sammy boy.
Oh, Louis.
Yeah, he's a character. I love the guy, but he'll be on, and hopefully we'll see you at the summit.
Yes.
Are you going to be around?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll leave it at that. Thanks again, man. And this is ZBrush Podcast number 9.
We're cruising. Number 9.
All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.
All right, thanks a lot.